But I guess I'm getting that, I get a lot of that baby stuff here and I get a lot of that care. And I think that's the only other thing about midwifery that I started to miss was the care.
Yeah.
I just couldn't give the care
Yeah.
anymore. In an environment like that, I just couldn't care for these women how I wanted to or how I knew how to care for people.
Yeah.
It just got drained. It got pulled out of me. It kind of got beaten out of me technically, that I just couldn't do that anymore.
Hi everyone and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I am Larissa and I'm here with Jess.
Hi, everyone.
And we are back with the beautiful Kelli, one of our incredible care specialists here at home and also an incredible midwife. Kelli, we were talking in the last episode about the basis of your midwifery training as one of the very first midwives to go through that training. The basis of it was that one-on-one care with the patient and that continuity of care. How does that contrast now from what you learned then to what the system looks like and feels like now?
Vastly different. I guess I've really kind of followed that in my career. I've really followed that continuity or tried to. In the early days of my career, obviously I had to build up those hours and numbers. So I had to work in hospitals. I had to work in, environments like I worked in Indigenous health and education and all those other areas. And then eventually I kind of found the spot that fit, that I fitted into, and that was continuity of care. And most of that time was actually in my own practice. So starting my own kind of midwifery practice and then moving, once I kind of moved out of private midwifery practice, moved into a model of care through an MGP program. So continued on with that continuity model.
What's MGP for those?
Some maternity group practice.
Right.
Usually in most tertiary hospitals, they will have a maternity group practice where there's a team of midwives, and ultimately in the one that I worked in, there was 2 midwives in the team, and one would be a primary midwife and one would be a second backup midwife. And ultimately then I would care for that whole pregnancy, be available for that labour and birth, and then care for that woman postnatally.
Right.
And those programs are very hard to get into, aren't
Very
they?
difficult to get
And
into.
have you ever seen, because how long you've been midwife for 23 years, so that continuity of care that you were able to provide people who were coming to you, have you ever seen that available to women and birthing people on a more widespread basis? Like, has it ever been there for the masses?
No, unless they pay for it.
Yeah.
Unless it's private.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone can have a private midwife, but it's going to cost money.
Yeah.
In a public hospital, it's obviously free, but no, it's not available for the masses.
Free, but it's impossible to get into the
So
program.
why did they do it? Why did they?
They did it originally. MGP programs came into hospitals because they wanted to move some of the low-risk care, the low-risk women, birthing people, out of the general kind of care programs. And they needed to move those because I guess they were cost effective. So women who have low risk pregnancies, low risk births generally don't cost a hospital a lot of money. And so when they then employed or then they kind of had midwives who were prepared to be those midwives for those women, it made it a lot easier and less strain on the hospitals, because those women weren't staying in hospitals for very long. They usually are out. Well, the MGP program I worked in, our women could go home in 6 hours post-birth because we would be there the next day to look after them, and we were on the phone to them 24 hours a day. They could text me at 3 a.m. in the morning with a screaming baby. So it wasn't and it's definitely not available to women who have higher risk pregnancies. They've changed a lot of that now. So women who do have gestational diabetes can be in MGP programs. sometimes with the right people on board, women who are having twins can have MGP.
Right.
But it started out very, very low risk and very difficult to get into.
And why isn't this available to everyone? Like, why is this not the model that we use all over Australia? That's probably a whole.
Look, that's if I could answer that question, Jess, I'd probably be a millionaire. I don't know. But look, of course it should be. And as and as the world says, every woman deserves a midwife. And yes, I agree with that. Every woman does deserve a midwife. But I guess it's just, again, it's is there enough midwives to do that?
Probably not.
It's a massive toll on your life being an on-call caseload midwife, either private or in a public environment.
Yeah.
So, you've got to be prepared to do that, to kind of give over a lot of your own self and family and time and weekends and public holidays and all sorts of stuff. So look, in the many years that I've worked in private practice as well as, MGP programs, is that there's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
A lot of midwives come and try it for a little while and then it's kind of not for them. Or they tend to go and have babies and then not necessarily capable of going back. So, but look, as I said, most major city hospitals will have an MGP program or something like an MGP program.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've written a book. What was your trigger, or what was that point for you that you wanted to put pen to paper or fingers to keypad?
Fingers to keypad. Look, for many, many years, and particularly the years through my private practice, so many people just, I get that whole, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book about all these amazing stories and the women and the people and the babies and the births that you've attended. And I kind of always put it on the back burner. I said, yeah, one day I will. One day I will. One day I'll do that. And it's interesting. One night, many, many years ago, I went to a comedy festival and there was a comedian, he stood up there, a male comedian, stood up and was telling everybody that he was making a joke out of home births. And he was commenting how home births are messy and, it's just awful and it shouldn't happen. And I was sitting in the row with my sons and my husband and they all kept looking at me because it's time I was a home birth midwife at the time. And they kept looking at me going, Mum, are you okay? Like, is this guy bothering you? And I thought at one point Darren might get up and punch him. But when I got home and I said, and I actually wrote it even in my phone, the comedian's name, because I won't say his name, if I ever write a book, I'm going to dedicate it to you.
Is it dedicated to him?
It's actually not.
No, good. I don't
I'd
think
like
he deserves.
to, but no, I don't think he deserves
think he
it.
deserves to have a book dedicated
So
to him.
he really bagged out home birth midwives and all sorts of things. So that wasn't necessarily the trigger, Larissa, for me to write the book, but the trigger really was that I had seen a lot, I'd done a lot. I had, as I said, I'd been in private practice. There was, a couple of events that kind of, I guess kind of made me think really about my career and some of the things that had led me to the changes in my career. So, and my time working in hospitals kind of really started that process. So, one day I actually sat down and I wrote it and it took me 7 months to write the book.
And was that with the sorry, what were you going to say?
Go.
I was going to say, because there's so many different types of writers out there, right? So are you one of those writers that would get up, go to the gym and then sit in a cafe for 5 hours and write Monday to Friday? Or would you just be going about your day and then all of a sudden you've got this pull to just write and you sit down and you look up and it's 12 hours later and it's dark?
A bit of both, to be honest. I was a bit of both. I kind of, because I wasn't working at the time and I kind of made it a bit like a job.
Yeah.
And I would get up, I would go to the gym, I would get dressed, I would put on makeup and I would do my hair and then I'd sit down. It's probably midday by the time I sat down at the desk after all of that. But then I would probably write until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. And what's also interesting is I actually, when I often do reread chapters, I think, wow, I don't remember writing that. I have no memory of physically writing that chapter. And Darren says to me, oh, yeah, I used to sit there and tap away. He goes, I miss the tapping.
Oh.
Were your boys still living at home or were they out of the
No.
nest at this stage? Yeah.
My boys left home. Louis left home when he was around about 15. He actually went and lived in Japan and did school, his last couple of years of schooling in Japan, and then he came back to Australia. He finished year 12 and then he went back to Japan. He loved it so much. And then he moved to Melbourne. He came here to Melbourne and he did a degree here. And Billy, I hate to say it, but we left him in boarding school. He loved it. It was great for him. The best thing I ever did for my son. If, anyone has troubled children, you should put them in boarding school because he learnt a lot. God love him. But, yeah, so he ended up staying.
Learned a lot of naughty things as well as good things in a boarding school.
Learned how to spend a lot of money at the pharmacy, but that's okay.
That's another podcast episode.
Oh, no, but yeah, so no, Billy then, so both the boys had left home.
Yeah.
So my children haven't lived at home since they were teenagers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Darren and I have been empty nesters for a really long time.
Yeah. So you didn't have anyone to worry about, just you, your husband and your book.
Yeah.
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 Amazing.
Yeah. We took a couple
What a
of trips
dream.
overseas and and
Oh,
then came back.
So the title of the book is The Midwife Crisis or Midwife Crisis.
Yes.
brilliant name.
Without,
Brilliant.
obviously, I cannot wait for it to come out. But tell us, without giving too much away, because obviously we want people to read it, tell us a little bit about what it's about.
Okay. So it's about me. It's about my career as a midwife. And I guess it's my career from everything, I guess, that I've done, the journey that I've done. I write about beginning the course, going through the degree, managing the degree with 2 small children, and then moving through the process of them becoming a private practicing midwife, and everything that was entailed in that. It then also talks, I write some amazing stories about birth, some beautiful home births that I attended, some not so beautiful home births that I've attended, because home birth isn't always, I like to say it isn't always fairy lights and unicorns.
Yeah.
It's, look, it can sometimes be quite full on and hard work for everyone involved. So I do kind of talk about a couple of stories of some of the not so great outcomes. I talk a lot about growing up as well, and I talk about sort of some of my youth, which wasn't always great. I was a good girl, but I was always naughty. I always did something naughty. So, and always got caught.
Your second son came back with your...
He did.
Yep.
I talk a lot about my incredible grandparents. So I write a really beautiful chapter about my grandparents. I supported them in their choices for palliative care.
Right.
So I looked after them as they were dying in their own home. So my grandfather died first. He had cancer. He had liver cancer, and he chose to have no treatment at all. He chose for no chemotherapy. So once he was diagnosed, it was 2 years by the time, and it was around about 6 days that it actually took him to pass away in their own home. And I supported my grandmother through that, and my grandmother and I were very, very close. And then 16 months later, she had a stroke. She'd actually sent, it was my eldest son's 21st birthday, and she had sent us to Hawaii, to her favourite place in Hawaii for his 21st birthday.
Oh.
And she had a stroke on the day that we flew home.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so, and very unwell. And this is a woman who would get up and go to work every day. She would dress herself up and she'd drive herself there in her beautiful cars. And she became very severely paralysed, and she made a choice. Her last words were, "Take me home.
Oh.
I want to die at home." So I got a phone call and my mum said, "You need to come.
Wow.
You need to come and help." So I did that again. So I did that in 2 of those in 16 months.
Wow.
So I write about that in the book. That's probably one of the hardest chapters to write, and I often still really struggle rereading it. And I talk about moving forward into, running my own practices. I had 2 practices. I had one in Brisbane, one in Sunshine Coast, and the process of building those businesses up. And then I talk about losing those businesses. Yeah, and how that all kind of unfolded. And then my journey into, I guess, struggling a little bit with that, the loss of a few things in my life. And then I do move into the role that I held at the hospital in the MGP program, and some of the things that went on with that, because I worked all the way through COVID, and that was tough.
Wow. Okay.
So 4 solid years of COVID in a hospital.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good one to read.
And I can imagine that was an incredibly cathartic experience writing all of this. Did it bring up a lot?
Yes, it did. Eventually it did.
Yeah.
And again, I guess during the physical writing of it, it just spewed out of me. It just spewed, and I don't remember half of writing it. But I do, when I read back chapters, I often kind of go, oh, wow, okay, yeah, that actually really did. And I often think, did I make that up? No, that actually happened. Because I have the physical evidence of the photographs, or I have, the notes. But I actually wrote the book without any notes, because I've kept all of the women, every birth that I've done, I've kept every note. I used to make folders for my women. I used to actually make books for my women.
Oh,
I used to take photos as well.
yeah, amazing.
So I used to make photo books
On
for
a
all the
point
women.
and shoot film camera with a flash, they're the best for births.
They were good.
Oh.
And then the iPhone came along with the hipstomatic stuff. So I did a lot of hipstomatic photos.
Yeah.
I actually won an award for birth photography.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I did. I think the year was 2018. Yeah, 2017, 2018. I won the birth photography award through the Australian College of Midwives.
Incredible. I need to see. I need to see some of your birth photography. Is there any of that in the book, or is
I'm
it?
not putting any pictures in the book, and a couple of reasons. Well, actually, that's not true. There has to be a picture of me in the book, but there's going to be one picture in the book, which actually was one of the ones that won an award. But that woman's story is not in the book. And the reason why I'm not putting pictures in is because I've had to de-identify everybody, and then I can't really put pictures of the real people in the book.
Of
so
course.
it's kind of a little tricky. So I've had to really sort of cut down on all of that. And originally I was, but I made a decision not to.
Yeah, fair enough.
And are you still practicing as a midwife?
Technically, yes and no. I'm not attending births as such.
Do you miss that?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
It's such, and again, I guess I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and that kind of always throws that beautiful oxytocin, that incredible feeling you get when you're in labour with somebody, and particularly someone you know really well, or women that you might have birthed before.
Yeah.
And you know that their birth is just going to be incredible. So I do miss it a lot, Jess, and it kind of sometimes breaks my heart a little bit. But look, I've been a midwife for so long, and I've done so many different aspects of midwifery. I still love all of it, but I teach. I'm sort of working with a group at the moment where I teach antenatal and postnatal classes, which I love. Always love teaching. I'm obviously working here at home, and I love the fact that I can be a midwife here, but not necessarily have all the kind of bits that go with that.
So you don't miss being on call?
I don't miss being on call, no.
Because I do feel like, I mean, in the time that I've known you since, you came for your interview, I just feel like, oh, what a loss to the world that you're not out there helping people deliver babies. But
I guess so.
what an asset you are to us.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I'm here. I don't miss being on call. Absolutely. I don't miss being called at 3:00 in the morning and driving all the way out there. I don't miss any of that.
And the anxiety of missing a call,
missing a call,
and just having to be on.
Just on. You're on all the time. Your adrenaline is pumping through you 24 hours a day.
Your
nervous system is quite full on.
Yeah.
So that's changed a lot for me, which has been really nice. But but I guess I'm getting that, I get a lot of that baby stuff here, and I get a lot of that care. And I think that's the only other thing about midwifery that I started to miss was the care.
Yeah.
I just couldn't give the care anymore. In an environment like that, I just couldn't care for these women how I wanted to, or how I knew how to care for people.
Yeah.
It just got drained. It got pulled out of me. It kind of got beaten out of me technically, that I just couldn't do that anymore. So
Yeah, wow.
What do you think? Do you think there is Do you think that's a common thing that's felt by a lot of midwives at the moment? I mean, I certainly know creating home and having, different people approach me about working here, and I know that like I will get about 4 or 5 emails a day asking to work here. And the common thread is I've been doing this for 10 years. 10 years seems to be a real kink in the road for midwives, that a decade of doing the work, they want to take a different path. And it seems to always come back to that, I miss the care, exactly like you said.
Yeah, you do.
Do you think that is...
Well, I became an eligible midwife and started my private midwifery practice 10 years in.
Oh, there you go.
So you pivoted.
I pivoted,
yeah.
And and like you say, Larissa, it's actually really common. It is common. And some pivot back. So they kind of do that for a little while and then they come back to the system because it's safe, and it's, from a point of view of financially it's safe. But look, yes, absolutely. And I think that care in hospitals has totally changed. What you assume that you're going to be able to do, you can't do. And the time that you want to spend with a woman to teach her how to look after her baby in general. I mean, we don't teach people how to bath a baby in hospital anymore because we just don't have time.
Yeah.
Really?
No, we don't. And it's just, I mean, that I find the hardest part about that. That's some basic baby care. We can't do it, let alone breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Which is why I think doulas have done an incredible job to step into that
Bridging that
amazing
gap.
bridging gap.
I mean,
I love that.
Doula clients who were like, in America, they teach you all this baby care stuff, and here we've got none of it. Like, can you show us how to put a nappy on? Can you show us how to bath our baby? Like, basic stuff that people, unless you've grown up around babies, how are you supposed to know this? And then you're just expected to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, which is hard work for them. And, and again, there's the women and the parents are very nervous. And, I've turned up to houses where babies have not been bathed for 15 days.
Yeah. Because
it's it's 2 weeks sometimes by the time, you can get to some of those people. And I'm like, oh, has this baby actually been bathed? Well, no one showed us how to do it, so we haven't done it. I'm scared we're going to drown it. And I'm like, okay, let's do that.
Wow.
So, and they have everything that they need for bathing the baby, but they've just not ever had anyone. And again, there's so many people who don't have family to help them do those things. Now we have just, there's not that multi-generational situation where mums live with families anymore. So, look, the care was, and I definitely have to say there is just not enough care in those environments. The hospital environment just can't care for them.
What's changed though? Like, because so it obviously started off at a point where that was happening. Is it population growth that has forced that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think population growth. I definitely think money. Funding, hospitals aren't getting the money in anymore, and the cost of doing those things is costing them more money.
Yeah.
So even to the point of, having midwives spend, 2 hours in one room with one person, one family, teaching them how to breastfeed and bath their baby. She's got 6 people to look after.
Yeah.
So she can't do that. And again, then when it comes back to money, they don't have enough money to put the extra staff on to support the midwives, the core midwives that are in there, the core staff that are in there on a daily rostered system. They can no longer afford to put the agency staff on to kind of, help them out with those things. So, but it's definitely changed, and I agree that populations have changed. And hospitals are just so big these days.
Yeah.
I've worked in a hospital that had 72 postnatal beds. Now, that's not huge compared to some other big hospitals around.
Do you think they've overcomplicated it?
Oh, absolutely.
Which has essentially then added cost.
Yes.
Which then is fueling this.
And look, the increased caesarean section rate,
Yeah.
you know, and I read something the other day, Western Australia's caesarean section rate is at 43%.
Wow.
Just Western Australia.
Wow.
It's like, wow, what's the rest of Australia then? Like, put all of that together. How many Caesars are we actually doing on a day, and even on a daily basis, how many caesarean sections? And when you do have a caesarean section, again, luckily, when you do have a caesarean section, you get one-on-one care.
Yeah.
So you do get a midwife to look after you for those good solid couple of hours after your Caesar.
But if we took away that intervention that leads to so many of the caesareans, then maybe the care could be more evenly distributed amongst people who are having babies, and we wouldn't be in this midwife crisis.
In this midwife crisis we're having. But I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, it's not that I'm not a fan of caesarean sections. I think Caesars are all needed for all sorts of different reasons. And, you know, I've definitely even home births, you know, I've had to unfortunately transfer and we've had Caesars. But, you know, I think there's a lot of caesarean sections that are there's the unnecessary caesarean section for, you know, a lot, and particularly in public hospitals.
Yeah.
That's kind of the rate of those are really high, really high. But that's, I guess that's just the way how it's happening, the way of the world.
I know. I think I said this on another episode, or I've had this conversation with someone about if they just inserted doulas into the system.
Yeah.
I think that would be such a great start to make some real change in the system.
Yeah, but at the moment there's so many. I mean, people like you, I feel, are the exception. There are midwives who love doulas, but there's also a lot of medical professionals hate doulas because they're threatened by them, and it's that whole thing of judgment versus curiosity. You know, they don't understand it, so they see doulas as kind of the enemy, whereas we need to integrate and work together because we all have the same common goal.
And I guess I mean I've always had doulas involved in my practices. You know, even as a private midwife, I always had doulas involved, you know, and there were people who would hire a doula and a private practicing midwife to have a home birth, and that's great, you know, and I love that. And I also loved, you know, and obviously people like you, Jess, who have those multi-skills, you know, you were a birth photographer but you're also a doula. You know, I met many of those and, you know, did home births for many of them too, you know. So the doulas would eventually, who were the birth photographers, who were the doulas, would eventually come and have home births with us.
Amazing.
So that was incredible. Loved that. You know. But yeah, look, and honestly, I guess if I'd never become a midwife, I probably would have become a doula.
Yeah.
But it's what's interesting is I can't do it the other way around. So I now I can't be a doula. Legally, I have I would have to deregister myself. So I can't necessarily be a doula as being a registered midwife, because I would have to use my midwifery skills and do obviously medical treatment if I was faced with something like that.
Right.
Postpartum doula?
I probably could.
Yeah, but I mean,
you probably could.
That's what.
Yeah.
I mean,
but that's my skills are in different know, areas.
Yeah.
And that's what I say. I think it's great that doulas have these incredible skills. Yeah. And that's where I love to kind of then hand over, okay, well, I've done this much and now it's the doula's turn.
Yeah.
And that's the theory, that if you put it in the hospital system, so it's understood that it's not medicalised, that it's just purely, okay, we're going to take this part of it now, just the caring part, and if we need the medicalisation of anything, we're here in the system. Like that would just
we can transition it in
so much.
It would, I agree. And wouldn't that be an ideal world? But yeah, I'm not sure that it's ever going to actually happen. We'll see.
Thank you, Kelli, so much. We could talk to you for hours. I'm so glad I get to work with you twice a week and talk to you about all the things.
Me too, Jess.
For everyone who's listening, look up Kelli's book, Midwife Crisis, and
we will put some notes and bits and bobs of where you can find it.
We can't wait to read it. So
thank you so much, Kelli.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.